You don't understand, Mr. Holloway. She was wearing that necklace the night my daughter disappeared. The rooftop restaurant fell strangely quiet after the woman's voice cracked through the rain-streaked evening air. A few guests turned their heads. Crystal glasses paused midair. Daniel Holloway stood near the private dining table with his jaw locked tight, one hand gripping his leather wallet so hard the veins showed beneath his pale skin. "Ma'am, I already told security I don't know who you are," he said coldly, exhaustion buried beneath the calm authority in his voice. The woman laughed bitterly through tears. "That's what rich men always say when the past comes back." Claire Whitmore froze beside table 12, a tray balanced carefully in her trembling hands as thunder rolled somewhere beyond the Manhattan skyline. Warm amber light reflected against the windows behind Daniel's broad frame, outlining the sharp cut of his charcoal suit and silver-streaked hair. He looked like the kind of man who belonged in magazines, untouchable, polished, impossible to shake. But then it happened. The woman reached for Daniel's wallet during the argument. Security stepped in immediately. The wallet slipped from Daniel's hand, hit the marble floor, and fell open beside Claire's shoes. She looked down instinctively and forgot how to breathe. Inside the wallet, tucked behind an old photograph, was a tiny silver necklace shaped like a crescent moon. Claire's fingers tightened around the tray. Her vision blurred for half a second. No, that couldn't be possible. Because 8-year-old Lily was wearing the exact same necklace at home right now. Claire knew every scratch on that pendant, every faded mark near the clasp. She had spent years staring at it during sleepless nights while her daughter slept beside her in their tiny Brooklyn apartment. The room suddenly felt too small, too warm. Daniel bent down quickly and picked up the wallet before anyone else noticed the necklace. "Take her outside," he told security quietly. No yelling, no scene. That somehow made it worse. The woman kept crying as they escorted her toward the elevator. "You can bury money, Daniel, but you can't bury truth." Silence followed after the doors closed. Only the soft sound of rain against glass remained. Claire stood completely still. One customer asked for another bottle of wine, but she barely heard him. Her heartbeat pounded louder than the jazz music drifting through the restaurant speakers. Daniel adjusted his cufflinks slowly, pretending nothing had happened. But for the first time all night, his hands were shaking too. Claire barely remembered finishing her shift. The next 2 hours moved like fragments of broken glass. Blurry faces, clinking plates, soft jazz floating through the rooftop dining room while her mind stayed trapped inside that open wallet. By the time she stepped out onto West 47th Street, the rain had slowed into a cold silver mist drifting between taxi lights and glowing storefront windows. She wrapped her olive cardigan tighter around herself and hurried toward the subway station, her sneakers splashing through shallow puddles along the curb. Manhattan at midnight always felt strange to her. Too bright to sleep, too lonely to feel alive. The downtown train screeched into the station with a gust of stale air and flickering fluorescent light. Claire sat alone near the back corner of the subway car, staring at her reflection in the darkened window. She could still see the necklace, the tiny crescent moon, the scratch near the clasp, the small dent on one side from years ago when Lily dropped it against the kitchen sink. Her stomach tightened again. "It is impossible," she whispered under her breath. A tired businessman glanced at her briefly before looking away. Claire lowered her eyes. She had spent 8 years building a life around silence. Silence was safer. Safer than questions. Safer than memories. Safer than explaining why Lily had no baby photos before age 1. Or why Claire always changed the subject whenever someone asked about family. 25 minutes later, she climbed the narrow apartment stairs in Brooklyn as warm cooking smells drifted from neighboring units. Apartment 4B glowed softly beneath the hallway light. Before Claire could even unlock the door, it swung open. "Mom," Lily threw, her arms around her waist with sleepy excitement, nearly knocking the purse from Claire's shoulder. The little girl wore oversized pajama pants covered in faded yellow stars, her blonde hair messy from sleep. And there it was again, the necklace resting against her small chest beneath the apartment light. Claire froze so suddenly that Lily tilted her head. "Mommy," Claire forced a smile. "Sorry, sweetheart, long night." Mrs. Ramirez, the elderly neighbor who watched Lily during evening shifts, stood near the tiny kitchen rinsing a coffee mug. "She waited up for you again," the older woman said gently. "Said she had a feeling you needed a hug tonight." Claire swallowed hard. Lily always said things like that. Things that felt too perceptive for an 8-year-old. Thank you for staying late, Claire whispered. After Mrs. Ramirez left, the apartment grew quiet except for the humming refrigerator and distant traffic outside the rain-speckled window. Lily climbed beside Claire on the worn couch and rested her head against her shoulder. Mom. Claire brushed a hand slowly through her daughter's tangled hair. Yeah, baby. Lily looked down at the necklace thoughtfully. Do you ever think people can belong to each other before they even meet? Claire felt her pulse stumble. Why would you ask that? Lily shrugged softly. I do not know. It just feels true sometimes. Claire stared at the crescent moon pendant glimmering faintly beneath the kitchen light. And for the first time in years, fear quietly returned to her eyes. Daniel Holloway had not slept more than 2 hours in almost 8 years, but tonight felt worse. The penthouse overlooking Central Park was silent except for the ticking of the antique clock near the fireplace and the distant hum of rain against 40-story glass windows. At 3:17 in the morning, he stood alone in the kitchen wearing a white dress shirt with the sleeves rolled unevenly to his elbows, staring at the crescent moon necklace resting beside a half-finished glass of bourbon. He had carried that necklace for so long that it no longer felt like an object. It felt like guilt, like punishment, like the final surviving piece of a life that disappeared one October night and never returned. Daniel rubbed both hands slowly across his face and closed his eyes. But every time he did, he saw the waitress again. Claire. The way her expression changed when the wallet fell open. That was not curiosity. That was recognition. Real recognition. His jaw tightened. At exactly 6:30 in the morning, the city outside shifted from charcoal gray to pale blue. Daniel was already dressed for work in another perfectly tailored suit when his assistant entered the executive office on the 48th floor of Holloway Medical Tower. Your 8 o'clock with the board has been moved to 9, Evelyn said carefully while placing a tablet on his desk. You also have 2 calls from London. Daniel barely looked up. Find out everything about the waitress from last night. Evelyn paused slightly. Sir. Claire Whitmore. He finally lifted his eyes toward her. Calm. Controlled. Dangerous in the quietest way. Employment history. Address. Family. I want a full report before noon. Evelyn hesitated. Is there a problem? Daniel stared past the office windows where early sunlight reflected off neighboring skyscrapers. I do not know yet. Meanwhile, across Brooklyn, Claire sat at the small kitchen table watching steam rise from a chipped coffee mug while Lily colored quietly beside the window. Soft morning light filled the apartment, washing everything in pale gold. For a moment, it almost felt peaceful, until Lily looked up suddenly. Mommy. Claire forced her voice steady. Yeah. Why did you cry last night? Claire froze with the mug halfway to her lips. I did not cry. Lily shrugged gently and kept coloring. You look like people do before they cry. Children noticed everything, especially children who grew up watching silence instead of explanations. Claire looked toward the necklace resting against Lily's sweater and felt that same cold pressure returning beneath her ribs. 8 years ago, she promised herself she would never go near that world again. Never near hospitals. Never near wealthy strangers asking questions. Never near Daniel Holloway. But fate had a cruel sense of timing. Her phone buzzed. Suddenly against the kitchen counter. Unknown number. Claire stared at it for 3 full seconds before answering softly. Hello. A calm female voice responded immediately. Good morning, Ms. Whitmore. My name is Evelyn Brooks. I work for Mr. Holloway. He would like to speak with you regarding last night. Claire's fingers tightened around the phone. Across the room, Lily unknowingly drew a tiny crescent moon over and over again with her blue crayon, while the morning sunlight slowly faded behind gathering storm clouds outside. Claire almost ended the call immediately. Her fingers trembled slightly against the cheap kitchen counter while rain clouds thickened beyond the apartment window. I think you have the wrong person, she said quietly. Evelyn's voice remained calm and professional. Mr. Holloway believes you saw something important last night. Claire glanced toward Lily, who sat cross-legged on the floor humming softly while coloring moons across an old paper placemat. I do not know what you are talking about. A pause followed. Not aggressive. Somehow worse. Ms. Whitmore, Evelyn said gently, Mr. Holloway is not calling to cause problems. He simply wants to ask a few questions. Claire closed her eyes briefly. Questions were dangerous. Questions opened doors she had spent years keeping locked. I work a double shift tonight, she replied carefully. I cannot meet anyone. Then perhaps 5 minutes after your shift ends. Claire almost refused again, until Lily suddenly looked up from the floor. Mommy. Claire covered the phone slightly. Yes, sweetheart. Lily tilted her head toward the window. The man from the restaurant is sad. Claire's blood turned cold. What? The silver-haired man. Lily shrugged softly. He looks lonely. Children should not be able to sense things like that from a single glance. But Lily always could. Claire turned away slowly and lowered her voice into the phone. Fine. 15 minutes. Public place only. By 6:40 that evening, Manhattan shimmered beneath wet streets and glowing traffic lights. Claire stepped out of the subway wearing her cream waitress uniform beneath a dark wool coat, her stomach tight the entire walk toward the restaurant. Every reflection in every glass window made her feel watched. Upstairs, the rooftop dining room glowed with warm amber light and low conversation. The dinner rush had already started. Claire tied her apron with slightly unsteady hands while another waitress leaned closer beside the service station. You okay? Claire forced a nod. Just tired. But exhaustion was not what sat behind her eyes tonight. Fear was. At exactly 7:12, Daniel Holloway entered the restaurant. Conversation softened almost immediately as several employees straightened instinctively. Power did that. Even quiet power changed the air around it. Daniel wore a dark navy overcoat this time, rain droplets still clinging to the shoulders. His expression remained composed, unreadable, but when his eyes found Claire across the dining room, something shifted behind them. Recognition, relief, maybe even disbelief. Claire felt her pulse stumble again. Daniel approached slowly, stopping beside table 9, while soft piano music drifted through hidden speakers overhead. Ms. Whitmore. His voice was lower than she remembered, tired around the edges. Claire kept both hands firmly around her order pad. Mr. Holloway. Neither of them moved for a second. Outside the windows, lightning flickered faintly behind the skyline. Daniel finally spoke. That necklace you saw last night. Claire interrupted immediately. I should get back to work. Please. One word. Quiet. Human. It stopped her. Daniel reached slowly into the inside pocket of his coat and removed the wallet again. Claire felt her breathing grow shallow before he even opened it. Where did your daughter get that necklace? He asked softly. Claire stared at him without blinking. The better question, she whispered, is where did you get yours? The question hung between them like thunder waiting to break. Daniel did not answer immediately. He simply looked down at the crescent moon necklace resting inside his wallet as though it still carried a pulse from another lifetime. Around them, waiters crossed the dining room carrying wine glasses and sizzling plates while soft piano music drifted beneath the low murmur of wealthy conversations. Yet somehow, the space around Claire and Daniel felt completely separate from everyone else. Smaller, heavier. Daniel finally lifted his eyes toward her. It belonged to my daughter, he said quietly. Claire felt something twist sharply inside her chest. Your daughter? Daniel nodded once. She disappeared 8 years ago. Claire forced herself to stay still even as her fingertips tightened around the order pad. People do not just disappear. A shadow crossed Daniel's expression. Brief. Controlled. Sometimes they do. Lightning flashed faintly behind the skyline windows, illuminating the silver strands in his hair for half a second. Claire studied him carefully now. Not the billionaire from magazine covers. Not the intimidating CEO employees whispered about. Tonight he looked like something else entirely. A man exhausted by carrying grief too long. Daniel glanced toward the necklace again before continuing. My wife died that same night. Claire's breath caught softly. He noticed. Of course he noticed. Men like Daniel Holloway built empires by noticing small things. There was an accident during a storm upstate, he said. Our vehicle lost control crossing Blackwater Bridge. By the time emergency crews arrived, his voice stopped there. Not dramatic, just unfinished. Somehow that hurt more. Claire suddenly remembered rain. Sirens. Smoke. Cold air cutting through shattered darkness while a baby cried somewhere nearby. Her stomach turned violently. No. She pushed the memory down immediately. Daniel studied her face now with growing intensity. You know something? Claire stepped back instinctively. I do not. Then why did you react like that last night? She opened her mouth, but no answer came. Because there was no safe answer. Before either of them could speak again, Another waitress hurried toward Claire carrying 2 dessert menus. "Table 14 needs you," she whispered awkwardly, clearly sensing tension. Claire nodded too quickly. "I should work." Daniel reached out slightly before stopping himself. Not touching her, never crossing the line. But the movement alone carried desperation beneath the restraint. "Please," he said quietly, "just tell me one thing." Claire turned slowly. Daniel's voice lowered further. "How long has your daughter had that necklace?" Silence stretched between them. Claire could hear ice clinking inside nearby glasses, rain tapping softly against the rooftop windows, her own heartbeat growing louder and louder beneath it all. Finally, she answered, "Since the night I found her." Daniel went completely still. Not angry, not confused, just still. The kind of stillness that happens right before a life changes forever. Across the dining room, someone laughed loudly near the bar, unaware that at table 9, the past had quietly opened its eyes again. Daniel stared at Claire as though the entire restaurant had disappeared around them. "Found her," he repeated softly. Claire immediately realized she had said too much. Her throat tightened. "I should not have said that." But Daniel stepped closer before she could move away again. Not aggressive, not demanding, just desperate in the quietest possible way. "Claire." Hearing her first name in his voice unsettled her more than she expected. "Please." She looked toward the rain-covered windows instead of at him. Manhattan blurred beneath streaks of silver water and distant headlights. 8 years of silence suddenly felt fragile. "There was an accident," she whispered carefully. "I was there that night." Daniel's face lost all color. For a moment, he looked older than 58, older than grief itself. "You were there?" Claire nodded once. "I was finishing a nursing rotation at St. Vincent's Satellite Clinic nearby. The storm knocked out half the power lines. Traffic was backed up for miles." Her voice remained calm, but her fingers trembled slightly against the edge of the table. Daniel noticed. Of course he noticed. "I remember hearing tires," she continued quietly. "Then metal. Glass. Sirens." Daniel closed his eyes briefly as though the memory physically hurt. Claire swallowed hard before continuing. "There was smoke everywhere. Rain. People shouting." Her breathing slowed unevenly. "And then I heard a baby crying." Silence wrapped around them. The piano music had stopped sometime during the conversation, replaced by the soft murmur of storm winds against the rooftop glass. Daniel looked at her carefully now, not like a CEO evaluating risk, like a father afraid to hope. "You found my daughter," he said. Claire's eyes finally met his. "I found a daughter." The distinction landed heavily between them. Daniel reached slowly into his coat pocket and removed an old photograph, slightly bent from years inside the wallet. He handed it to her carefully. Claire looked down. A younger Daniel stood smiling beside a brunette woman holding a tiny blonde toddler wrapped in a pink blanket. The crescent moon necklace rested against the child's chest. Claire stopped breathing for half a second. Lily had the same eyes, the same tiny curve near the left eyebrow. Her hand trembled slightly as she gave the photo back. Daniel noticed that too. "After the accident," he said quietly, "they told me my daughter could not be found." His voice cracked slightly on the last word before he steadied it again. "We searched for months. State police, private investigators, hospitals. Nothing." Claire looked down at the floor. "Records disappeared after a fire at the clinic 2 weeks later," she whispered. "Most emergency files were destroyed." Daniel stared at her in disbelief. "And all this time?" Claire interrupted immediately. "I never knew her name." That part was true. For years, she only knew the child as Lily because it was the first word the little girl learned to say clearly after the nightmare stopped. Daniel leaned back slowly against the table edge, one hand covering his mouth as emotion flickered across his face too quickly to hide. "Does she know?" he asked. Claire's expression softened immediately. "No," Daniel nodded faintly. Outside, thunder rolled low across Manhattan, while inside the rooftop restaurant, 2 strangers stood surrounded by expensive silence, realizing their lives had been connected long before either of them understood why. Claire did not sleep that night either. The apartment remained dim except for the pale kitchen light glowing above the sink, while rain drifted softly against the windows after midnight. Lily had fallen asleep on the couch. Beside her coloring books, one small hand curled protectively around the crescent moon necklace even in sleep. Claire sat nearby wrapped in silence, staring at the city lights beyond Brooklyn rooftops. Her entire life had been built around one promise: protect the little girl no matter what. But now the past had a face again, and his name was Daniel Holloway. Across Manhattan, Daniel stood alone inside his penthouse office with the old photograph still resting in his hands. He had looked at that picture thousands of times over the years, memorized every detail. His wife Caroline smiling beneath autumn sunlight. Tiny Amelia laughing against her shoulder with the necklace around her neck. Amelia, even thinking the name after so many years still hurt like opening an old scar. Daniel slowly sat down near the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the sleeping city. For the first time in nearly a decade, hope terrified him more than grief ever had. At 7:15 the next morning, Evelyn entered his office carrying a thin folder. "The preliminary background report on Claire Whitmore," she said carefully. Daniel took it immediately. Sparse employment history. No social media presence. No marriage records. No official birth certificate matching Lily Whitmore before age 1. Daniel's chest tightened slightly. "There is more," Evelyn added quietly. "Claire worked briefly as a nursing trainee under a temporary program near Blackwater County 8 years ago." Daniel looked up sharply. "The same county as the accident?" Evelyn nodded once. "Yes." Silence settled heavily between them. Daniel stared at the file for several seconds before speaking again. "Schedule, nothing afternoon." "Sir, I am going to Brooklyn." Meanwhile, Claire walked Lily to school beneath a gray morning sky while cold wind swept fallen leaves across the sidewalk. Lily skipped ahead wearing a tiny yellow raincoat and worn sneakers that squeaked against wet pavement. Completely innocent, completely unaware that the world around her was beginning to shift. "Mommy," Lily asked suddenly while holding Claire's hand. "Yeah. Are we poor?" The question caught Claire off guard. "Why would you ask that?" Lily shrugged. "Emma at school said rich people live in buildings with doormen and shiny elevators." Claire smiled faintly despite herself. "Then yes, we are definitely not rich." Lily giggled softly before growing serious again. "I do not mind, though." Claire looked down at her. "No." Lily shook her head. "Because poor people still get pancakes." Claire laughed quietly for the first time in days. A real laugh. Warm. Human. But the moment faded when a black luxury SUV slowly pulled up across the street near the school entrance. Claire recognized the driver instantly from the rooftop restaurant. Daniel stepped out a second later wearing a dark wool coat beneath the cold morning wind. He did not approach immediately. He simply stood there watching Lily carefully as children hurried past them carrying backpacks and umbrellas. Claire felt fear rise instantly beneath her ribs again. But then something unexpected happened. Lily looked directly at Daniel and smiled like she already knew him somehow. Daniel had negotiated billion-dollar acquisitions without his hands shaking once. But standing outside that small Brooklyn elementary school beneath a cold gray sky, he could barely breathe. Lily smiled at him with easy innocence while children rushed around them holding lunchboxes and colorful umbrellas. The sound of traffic faded beneath the sudden roaring in his chest. She looked so much like Caroline that it physically hurt to stare at her too long. The same pale blonde hair, the same thoughtful eyes, even the tiny crease near her eyebrow when she smiled. Claire stepped protectively closer without making it obvious. "Lily," she said gently, "go inside before class starts." Lily looked between them curiously. "Do you know each other?" Neither adult answered immediately. Daniel finally forced a small smile. "I know your mother from the restaurant." Lily nodded seriously as though evaluating him. "You looked sad the other night." Claire closed her eyes briefly. Of course she said that out loud. Daniel blinked in surprise before something unexpectedly soft crossed his face. "Did I?" Lily nodded again. Like people who miss somebody. Silence followed. Even the wind seemed quieter for a second. Claire touched Lily's shoulder gently. "Go ahead, sweetheart." Lily hugged Claire quickly before looking back at Daniel one more time. "Bye, silver hair man." Daniel actually laughed under his breath. A real laugh. Short, rusty, like something unused for years. Then Lily disappeared through the school doors. The moment she was gone, the warmth vanished with her. Claire crossed both arms tightly against the cold wind. "You should not be here." Daniel looked toward the school entrance for another second before answering quietly. "I needed to see her." Claire's expression hardened slightly. "She is not a business problem you can investigate." Daniel turned toward her immediately. "Do not do that." "Do what?" "Pretend I came here as a CEO." His voice remained calm, but emotion strained beneath every word now. "I came here as a father." Claire looked away toward passing traffic. You do not know that yet. Daniel reached slowly into his coat pocket and removed a folded document. I do. Claire stared at the paper without taking it. Her stomach tightened instantly. What is that? The emergency intake report from Blackwater County. Claire's pulse stumbled. Those records were destroyed. Most of them, Daniel corrected softly. Not all. He handed her the document carefully. Claire unfolded the faded copy with trembling fingers. Her own handwriting stared back at her from the page. Female child, approximately 10 months old, found unconscious near highway embankment during storm evacuation. Temporary identification, Lily. Claire stopped breathing. Daniel watched her quietly. You named her, he whispered. Claire's eyes filled immediately, though no tears fell yet. She would not stop crying, she said faintly. The nurses kept calling her Jane Doe. I hated it. Daniel swallowed hard. So you gave her a name. Claire nodded once while staring at the report. Wind swept loose strands of hair across her face. She calmed down when I said Lily. Daniel looked toward the school doors again, with visible emotion breaking beneath his composure now. That was Caroline's favorite flower, he whispered. Claire slowly lifted her eyes toward him. And for the first time since this began, neither of them tried to deny the truth anymore. 3 weeks later, the first snow of December fell quietly across Brooklyn. Soft white flakes drifted past apartment windows and covered the sidewalks in thin silver layers while the city slowed beneath winter light. Claire stood near the tiny kitchen stove flipping pancakes as Lily laughed at something on television from the living room couch. The apartment still smelled like coffee and maple syrup every Sunday morning. Some things had not changed, and maybe that mattered most. A gentle knock sounded at the door exactly at 9 o'clock. Lily jumped off the couch immediately. That is him. Claire smiled before she could stop herself. Use your inside voice. Lily opened the door before Claire reached it. Daniel stood in the hallway wearing a dark wool coat dusted lightly with snow, holding an awkward-looking grocery bag in one hand and a carton of orange juice in the other. I brought breakfast supplies, he said carefully. Lily grinned. You already brought pancakes last week. Daniel looked mildly embarrassed. I am still learning. Claire leaned against the kitchen doorway, watching them quietly. 3 weeks ago, Daniel Holloway had been a stranger carrying grief inside a leather wallet. Now he stood in her apartment every Sunday morning, trying to learn how much syrup Lily liked on her pancakes and pretending he did not hate cartoons. Life changed strangely sometimes. Not loudly, quietly, slowly, like snow falling overnight. Daniel stepped inside and removed his coat while Lily immediately grabbed his hand. Come see my science project. He let her pull him toward the living room without hesitation. Claire watched the scene carefully. The expensive watch, the polished shoes. The billionaire CEO who once intimidated entire boardrooms now sitting cross-legged on an old carpet while an 8-year-old explained planets made from painted foam balls. Daniel looked up at Claire briefly during Lily's explanation. There was still sadness in his eyes. There probably always would be. But now there was something else too. Peace. Later that morning, sunlight spilled softly through the apartment windows while Daniel helped Lily retie the crescent moon necklace before she left for a friend's birthday party downstairs. His fingers moved carefully against the tiny clasp, almost reverently. There, he whispered. Lily hugged him without warning. You smile more now. Daniel froze slightly before hugging her back. So do you? Claire turned away toward the sink for a moment because suddenly her eyes burned again. Not from fear this time. From relief. From exhaustion finally ending. From realizing that some people enter our lives late, but still arrive exactly when they were meant to. Outside, children laughed in the snowy courtyard